Well, according to the pattern, part one. In a sense, this is, just give me just a second here. I want to make sure I'm doing something just right. Anyway, excuse me. According to the pattern, part one. Part two will be this evening. Now, I'm going to take one more second. I promise that's the end. This evening, according to the pattern, part two. In actuality, there's a sense in which this is part two, and tonight will be part three. Thursday night, the message was, what is church? Which kind of answers, what is the church? What is the church? And if you haven't watched Thursday night's message, what is church? I would suggest that you go back and listen to that. And of course, you're here today listening to this, and hopefully you will be tuning in tonight, 6:30 p.m. California time, for according to the pattern, part 2, 3 in a sense. As I mentioned Thursday night, it's really an important subject because of all that's going on in the church. And there's just an explosion there's an explosion, and it's not good. Trying to think what adjective can I use? It's just, there's false doctrine, there's unholy allowances going on in the church unchecked. There is a trying to be somewhat careful. I can think of a whole bunch of words, but there's a whole bunch of undermining the Word of God. The Bible, scriptures, that's good, and we can learn a lot of things from it. But after all, we're in the 21st century. So there's just an awful lot of problems in the church in America, and I'm suspecting it's around the world, but I don't know what all is going on in all the other countries. But I know here in the United States, one of the problems has been not considering, not living up to, not seeking to attain the standard that I talked about on Thursday night. Now, what was that? I don't want to take the time to redo Thursday night's program because I've got plenty for this morning, although I'm going to try to maybe stop a little sooner tonight this morning because I want to take more time tonight. I generally have a longer message on Sunday morning and then shorter on Sunday night. I think I may turn that around today, but listen carefully. Consider what I'm saying. And I will start off by saying this one sentence from Thursday. Church is for saved people. I've been saying this for decades. Church is for saved people. It is not a congregation of unbelievers, although to a great extent it has become that. The church is for born-again, Bible-believing, Christ-honoring, God-believing people, the children of God, gathering together for a number of reasons, and that's what tonight's message will be about. Well, jumping right in after all of that to the message this morning, according to the pattern. I want to give you 3 or 4 illustrations, and you might, you're welcome to follow along. I'll let you know where I'm at. I'm reading out of the New American Standard Version, but you might, at least if you don't follow along, you want to write these scriptures down so that later today or in the week, you can go back, read them yourself. Be like the Bereans, be like those in Thessalonica, and study the scriptures to see if Well, they were studying to see if what Paul was saying was right on. You can study them to see, is Mike Dixon right on? Well, Genesis. We're going to go to Genesis first. Genesis chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6. Now, this is about Noah and the ark. And in these stories, true stories that I'll be going over today, I'm not going to be reading the whole chapter or chapters dealing with it. I'm going to be zeroing in on what the subject is about today, according to the pattern. And if you think that I'm leaving anything out that's germane, well, first off, you can let me know, but also include that in your own studies if you think I'm leaving something out. And I guarantee you this, I'm not leaving anything out on purpose. You should be at Genesis chapter 6, verse 9, if you're following along. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just or righteous man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons. He begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth also was corrupt before God, which is part of the reason why the flood's coming up on the earth, God's cleansing. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled, filled with violence. That's kind of scary. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Well, God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted her way upon the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Verse 14, God's talking to Noah. All right, make an ark for yourself of gopher wood. God said, I want you to make a great big boat, and here's the kind of wood that I want you to use. Make an ark for yourself of gopher wood, and I want rooms in it. Rooms shall you make in the ark, and you shall pitch it within and without. And this is the fashion which you shall make of it. The length of this big boat, this ark, is to be 300 cubits. The breadth is to be 50 cubits. And the height is to be 30 cubits. I was studying all about cubits afresh last night, but I don't want to get off on that. But this is a big boat. This is a big ark. But notice this, that God says, I want you to make it, and I want you to make it out of gopher wood. And here's pitch, I guess, like a tar on the outside and on the wood and around, inside and out. And here's how long I want it to be. Here's how high I want it to be. Here's how wide I want it to be. He didn't just say build an ark and try to be careful because I'm going to bring a flood upon the earth. He said, here's exactly how I want you to make it. I want you to also include a window. Make a window in the ark. In a cubit shalt thou finish it above, and one window and one door. I want you to make a door in the ark that you will set in the side thereof. And this whole thing is to be a lower and a second and a third story. That's how I want you to make it. Do you see that Noah is given instructions? He's given a pattern. Here's what I want you to make. Here's what I want you to make it out of. Here's how tall, how wide, how long, and he's going to tell him what he wants in it. This is made for Noah and his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. So, verse 17, behold, I, even I, am bringing a flood of water upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life from under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall perish. But with you, I will establish my covenant, and you shall come into the ark that he's made, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. And every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort you shall bring into the ark, to keep them alive with you, male and female. Verse 20, of fowls after their kind, of cattle after their kind, of every creeping thing of the earth after his kind, 2 of every sort you shall bring unto you, and keep them alive. As for you, take for yourself some of all food which is edible, gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for the livestock, the birds, and everything that's going to be with you. Now, verse 22, very simply stated, thus did Noah. Noah did what God told him to do, according to all that God commanded him, so did he. He did it. And again, God gave him all the instructions, gave him the pattern, and so it was constructed how God wanted it constructed, a window, a door, what was to be brought in, and he had more instructions than that. But I want you to note this. Noah, I'm thinking Noah and the people didn't even understand what a flood was, or rain coming out of the sky, and certainly enough to cover the whole earth. That's what God says. It didn't say it was a local flood. It was a flood over the whole earth. Now, I want to pose a question to you, and I'm hoping it won't take a whole lot of thought. But what if Moses is writing this, but what if Noah had decided, well, you know what? There's maple trees are so close here. I think we'll use maple wood. Do you think that the ark would have made it through the great flood that came upon the whole earth? What if Noah had said, no, you know what? Some of these animals, I don't even like some of these kind of animals. I'm just going to leave them off. How pleased with that do you think that God would be? Noah built the ark according to the pattern and plan that God gave him. And surely we are in agreement. It wasn't safe. It wasn't righteous. It would not have been healthy for Noah to change anything, thinking, well, it might be better if I had 2 doors, a front door and a back door in case we need to escape. And with all these smelly animals, I think I ought to put in a few more windows around this place. God gave him instructions, and Noah followed the plan. God gave him the pattern, and so he did. All right, that's one story, true story. That was instructions about building the ark. I want to go on into Exodus about the tabernacle. And we don't have time to go over 15 chapters in Exodus, but go with me we'll start off in Exodus 25 and verse 8. Exodus 25, I'm going to start reading at verse 8. I'm not going to read a whole lot here, but you'll get the idea. Exodus 25:8. Let them, God speaking to Moses about the construction of a tabernacle, let them construct a sanctuary for me that I may dwell among them. God is telling Moses, I want a tabernacle. And there's going to be a holy place. There's going to be a most holy place. There's going to be some accoutrements in there. There's going to be a table of pierced bread or show bread on the right, kind of like a candelabra on the left side, right in front of a veil. There's going to be I want a altar of incense, and then the Ark of the Covenant is going to be in the room just beyond that thick veil, all by itself. Now, let them construct a sanctuary for me that I may dwell among them. According to all that I'm going to show you, as the pattern of the tabernacle and the tabernacle of the furniture, all of the accoutrements, just so you shall construct it. He was told how wide it was to be, how high it was to be, how long it was to be, how long the holy place, how long the Holy of Holies was to be, all about the table of showbread and the bread, the candelabra, so to speak, on the left side, the altar of incense, and what was to go on to the altar of incense. All of this, what it's to be made out of. The cherubim embroidered on that veil between the holy place and the most holy place. Just outside the entrance, there was to be a bronze wash bowl for cleansing the hands before the priest would go in. And only priests could minister, men from the tribe of Levi. There was to be an altar of sacrifice before you could, somewhat in front of the tabernacle itself. There was a fence around. All of the silver was to be used. I mean, everything about the tabernacle was God's instruction. It wasn't Moses thinking, well, you know what? I think it'd be nice if we have silver here, and instead of using bronze for the laver of washing, I think maybe we'll use gold for that. No, God told him what to make, the dimensions, what it was to be used for, how the priests were to be dressed and clothed, the steps going up to the altar of burnt offerings. This is, of course, outside of the tabernacle, but in the courtyard. How careful priests were to be in going up those stairs. I mean, everything. I mean, it's everything. Chapter after chapter after chapter in the scriptures about how God wanted that constructed, what it was to be constructed out of. Again, what was to be embroidered on the veil, everything. He said, again, according to all that I'm going to show you, as the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of its furniture, and not just its furniture. He goes on to tell about all these other things I've just mentioned briefly. That's the way you're to construct it. Noah wasn't given a choice about what kind of wood, how many windows, etc., etc. Noah, it's to be done according to the pattern. Now we come to the tabernacle. Moses, it's to be done according to the pattern that I give you. It was God's instruction. It was God's pattern for the ark. Now it's God's pattern and his instructions for the construction of the tabernacle. Well, chapter 26 and verse 30, you shall erect the tabernacle according to its plan, which has been shown to you in this, that God showed to him, shown to you in the mountain. Again, God reiterating, I want it done exactly as I have told you. And then we'll skip way ahead. I want to go through all of those things, but you can read them and it's interesting. And it all has a reason, by the way. So the sons of Israel did all the work according to all that Jehovah had commanded Moses. And Moses examined all the work, and behold, they had done it just as Yahweh had commanded. As he had told them, Yahweh had told him, he told them, and they followed his instructions, shall we say, to the letter. This they had done. So Moses blessed all of the workers who had followed his instructions to the T, which were God's instructions. Nothing left to their own imagination. Nothing left to what might have been their preference instead of what Moses told them it was to be done, how it was to be done. Noah's Ark, the tabernacle. What came after the tabernacle? The temple. If you'd like to follow along, instructions for the Solomonic temple, Solomon's temple, God's temple. Remember, King David, he thought of himself first. We have to know that. He thought of himself first. David built himself a nice castle, really, really nice house there in Jerusalem. And finally came to himself a little bit there and said, you know what? I'm living in all of this beauty and I love my home and everything, but God doesn't have a house. Well, as things go along, so I'm jumping ahead again for just a second, God made it clear, I don't dwell in temples made with hands. And I've never asked for one to be built. But I'm going to give some instructions, but not to you, David, but to your son. You're going to have a son. That was Solomon. He had a number of sons, but peace, Shlomo, that's what he named his son, Solomon, he's going to construct the temple. The tabernacle moved wherever they were going. God's presence was there in the daytime and the night, pillar of fire by night and a cloud by day. But now that they're settled in Jerusalem, the city of peace, okay, we're going to build something more permanent because you're not going to be traveling through the wilderness again for 40 years. So go with me to 1 Chronicles chapter 28, and we're going to begin verse 10. 1 Chronicles chapter 28, verse 10. Remember, David doesn't get to build it. God said, no, your son. Solomon is going to build it. So now David is going to instruct Solomon, who is going to instruct the workers in the same way that God gave the instructions to Moses, and Moses gave it to the workers for the construction of the tabernacle. This is all God's word, and it's coming from God. 1 Chronicles 28:10. Consider now, for Yahweh, David talking to Solomon, consider now, for Yehovah, or Yahweh, has chosen you to build a house for the sanctuary. Be courageous and do it. Be courageous and act. Then David gave to his son Solomon the plan of the porch of the temple, its buildings, its storehouses, its upper rooms, the inner rooms, the room for the Holy of Holies, the room for the mercy seat, which was on the Ark of the Covenant, and the plan of all that he had in mind for the courts of the house of Yehovah, for all of the surrounding rooms, for the storehouses of the house of God, for the storehouses of sanctified, dedicated utensils and things. Also, for the divisions of the priests, of the Levites. And by the way, I didn't read that. There's so much to read. But in the tabernacle, there was one family and had, from the Levitical tribe, had a job, their job, whenever they were putting up the tabernacle or taking it down to move as God instructed them. There were 3 different families within that family, and they each had their work to do. I mean, every little thing. God didn't leave anything to the imagination or the decision of his people. Here's how I want it done. And so we have here. So verse 13, also for the divisions of the priests and the Levites, and for all of the work of the service of the house of Yehovah, and for all of the utensils of the service in the house of Yehovah, or Yahweh, if you like. And I've liked that for a long time. For the golden utensils, the weight of gold for all the utensils, listen, what to make it out of, how much gold to use in making it. It's got to weigh right, even WEIGH. It's got to weigh right according to God's instructions. Verse 14, for the golden utensils, the weight of gold for all utensils, for every kind of service, and the same for the silver utensils, the weight of silver for all the utensils, for every kind of service. So even the utensils weren't to be used for common eating. I mean, it's not like a fork, just using that as an illustration. They couldn't eat their own dinner with that. It had to be used for what God intended it to be used for, and kept where he wanted it kept, in the temple that he wanted built according to his instructions. The candelabra, or the golden lampstand, the weight of gold, that was all told to Solomon. And David got all this from God. He didn't make any of this up. And the weight of gold for the golden lampstands and their golden lamps, there were 7 of them. And the weight of each lampstand and its lamps according to the use of each lampstand. I think for a lot of people, I could have done the same thing with tabernacle. And I could do the same thing if we had a few hours with the temple now. I'm guessing it could get kind of boring hearing about every little thing, including sacrifices, what, when, how many. If there was a change, why a change on certain dates for certain reasons. I don't want to beat this to death, but I want you to understand that when it came to Noah's Ark, the tabernacle, and now as we're reading about the temple, God didn't give man freedom just to make your own decisions. Just try to build it real good and dedicate it to me. No, he said, here's how I want it made, out of what I want it made. And now we're even talking about utensils, how much they're to weigh, and where they're to be stored, when they're to be touched, when they're not to be touched. Verse 16, and the gold by weight for the tables of showbread, for each table, and the silver, and silver tables, and the forks, and the basins, and the pitchers of pure gold. And for the golden bowls with the weight of each bowl, and for the silver bowls, and the weight for each of those bowls. And the altar of incense, refined gold by weight, and gold for the model of the chariot. And the cherubim that spread their wings that covered the Ark of the Covenant. Remember that? The covenant of Jehovah. Verse 19. All this, David said to his son Solomon, all this, David said, Jehovah made me understand in writing by his hand upon me all the details of the pattern, of this pattern that I'm talking to you about right now, Solomon. I hope you find this interesting. But along with that, I hope you're getting this, and I know I'm being repetitious. It's got to be done God's way. And you're going to be in deep trouble if you don't do it God's way. And it's not going to be glorifying to God. It's not going to be this, it's not going to serve the purpose of God if it's not done his way. And he's having, if he could, God spoke the universe into existence. He could sure speak a big boat into existence, couldn't he? Or a big fish for Jonah. He could speak a tabernacle and have it be perfect in every way, accoutrements and all, if he wanted to. The temple in Jerusalem, he could just spoke every little thing. And we haven't even touched the surface on these things. But he could have spoken. But he put it into the hands of man. His people, not the heathen, his people. All this, David said to Solomon, Jehovah made me understand in writing by his hand upon me all the details of the pattern. Then God said to his son Solomon, be strong and courageous and act. Do not fear nor be dismayed. Now hold it. He's going to build a temple. He's going to have a lot of workers. He's conscripting an awful lot of workers. God's people. But do you find it interesting, that little sentence that I just read there, right from what God said through David to Solomon? Be strong, be courageous, act, do what you're supposed to do, but don't fear and don't get dismayed. Why? I'm building a temple for God. What's there to be courageous about that? It's going to be a lot of work, but I'm up for the work. The people had a mind to work. That was in the rebuilding. You read about that in Nehemiah. The people, and Ezra, the people had a mind to work. Well, the people have a mind to work here. Led by Solomon, not by David. Be courageous, be strong, and act, and don't fear, and don't be dismayed. Now remember all of this that I'm talking about Thursday night and this morning, and the conclusion this evening. And I hope you will be there for that. Be strong and be courageous. Why? Because people are always going to come up with a better idea. That St. Peter mentality. Well, Lord, don't just wash my feet. Here, wash me all over. Man always has alternate thoughts and ideas to improve. We got a lot of pastors, theologians, people in the church, better idea how to have church, better ideas on how the church ought to be, what goes on in the service. I know God said this, but. God's people need to learn to do God's things God's ways and call God's things by God's words instead of making up stuff. I hope this is the only real negative thing that I'll say this morning, but I don't have a whole lot of faith. If I was to be given a megaphone for the whole United States to hear, I'm not sure there's a whole lot of Christians even be interested in this, but I hope you are. It's no accident. If you're watching this on Wednesday or next month, it's no accident that you're watching this. But we need to pray and we need to be kind. This is in our own local congregations. You need to be careful how you use God's words. Well, be courageous, because you're going to have people wanting to do it some other way. You're going to have some say, well, not now. There's going to be some that say, we don't have enough gold. We don't have enough silver. It's not that important to have it built like you're telling us, Solomon. I mean, this is worship for God, and God's not interested in silver and gold. He's the one that created all the silver and gold. No, Solomon, you be strong, be courageous, don't fear, even if workers say, well, I'm not going to do it that way. No matter what comes at you. When it came to the rebuilding of the Solomonic temple in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, they had exterior enemies. But the concern here isn't external enemies. It's God's people with their own ideas and wanting to impose that upon Solomon and the building of the temple. Be strong and courageous and act, and do not fear, nor be dismayed, for Jehovah, God, my God, is with you. He will not forsake you. He will not fail. He's not going to forsake you until all the work of the services of the house of Yahweh is finished. Well, he never did anyway. But in all of this work, he's not going to depart from you. He's not going to forsake you. He's right there with you. Now, behold, There are divisions of priests and Levites, as in the tabernacle, for all the service of the house of God. And every willing man of any skill will be with you in all of the work for all kinds of service. The officials and all of the people will be entirely at your command. Now get to it. Now it would be nice, I'm just not going to do it. I want you to read for yourself. It'd be nice to jump forward and hear Solomon's prayer at the dedication of this temple when it was completed. Well, I said I was going to try to finish a little sooner, but I've got one more. And if you'd like to go to Ezekiel with me, Ezekiel chapter 40, I'm going to begin at verse 4. Now, this is about a temple. This is given in the 25th year of Ezekiel's Ezekiel having been deported to Babylon, his captivity. And there were others that had already gone on before him, but in the 25th year of his being there, he's given a vision from God. God is speaking directly to Ezekiel. And he's talking about a temple. Now, it's called a temple, but you get close to the end of these instructions over the next 8 chapters, it's also called a city. This temple is called a city. And some of the instructions from this temple, I mean, some people talk about this is going to be rebuilt, but I told you I was working on cubits and all last night. There's not enough room on Mount Zion. I mean, some of the measurements that God gave, like over 7 miles wide. The top of Mount Zion is not 7 miles wide. So there's something more than meets the eye here. But not to get too far off track on all of that. Here is Ezekiel in Babylonian captivity. Remember, God's people were there for 70 years. And then under Cyrus the Great, they were set free, and only a remnant went back. Most of the Jews stayed there in captivity, although no longer as captives, and they'd been pretty free all along. Anyway, up there. And this temple, by the way, no one even considered these instructions that God gave to Ezekiel when they were in Babylonian captivity. No one considered these instructions to rebuild the Solomon's temple when they went back at the end of 70 years. Why not? Why didn't they take this letter, these instructions from God to Ezekiel and say, now, we're going to have to build it exactly according to these instructions? It may be because they realized there's something more than meets the eye, because there ain't no way. There's not that much space. They might not have said ain't, but I think they recognize there's something more than meets the eye. Now, a lot of Jewish people, a lot of Christian people, pastors, theologians, Bible teachers, Bible college teachers, some of them think this is going to be rebuilt when Jesus comes again, and Jesus is going to dwell in this temple for 1,000 years. Ain't going to happen. He's not interested in the sacrifice of animals. He sacrificed his son. He's not interested in simply dwelling among his people. He wants to dwell in his people. Whatever this is about, I'm just going to read a couple of verses here. But you want to, for some of you, you really want to test your brain and see just how interested you are. Read all 8 chapters from chapter 40, verse 1 through 48. I mean, you talk about minute little instructions and things. What's all that about? Here we go. Exodus chapter 40, verse 4. The man said, that he was seeing there, the man said to me, Ezekiel is saying, Son of man, see with your eyes and hear with your ears and give attention to all that I'm going to show you. For you have been brought here in order for me to show it to you, Now, declare to the house of Israel all that I'm going to show you. Declare to all of the Jewish people, my people, all that you see. Now, unlike Moses, unlike Noah, unlike Solomon, nothing about constructing it, nothing about building it. What is it? Pay attention. Hear with your ears, see with your eyes, give attention to all that I'm going to show you. That's the reason why I've brought you here, to show it to you. And I want you to preach this, declare it to the house of Israel, all that I'm going to show you. Now I want to skip down to verse 10. That was Ezekiel 40, verse 4. Now I'm going to Ezekiel 43:10. As for you, son of man, now remember, he said, I'm going to show you everything. I want you to preach it. As for you, son of man, describe it. Describe the temple that he's showing to the house of Israel. Describe it to my people. Why? If they're not going to build it, why? Describe it to my people that they may be ashamed of their iniquities. What? This so-called third temple isn't something to be built, but preached and described under the anointing of the Holy Spirit and preached right is going to cause people to repent, to be ashamed of their sins and iniquities. And let them measure, this has to be in their own hearts and minds, measure the plan. If they are ashamed of all that they have done, make known to them the design of the house, temple, house, city. Make known to them the design of the house, its structure, its exits, its entrances, all its designs, all its statutes, all of its laws, and write it in their sight so that they may observe its whole design and all its statutes to do them. You don't construct statutes. You don't construct design. He's saying to do what all of this is all about. It's not about building a temple. We're told, 1 Corinthians 3, 2 Corinthians 3, 2 Corinthians 6. Don't you, Peter, 1 Peter chapter 2, don't you know that your bodies are the temple of God? We're all living stones being built into a temple, a holy dwelling place for God. Jesus Christ, the rock, and we are little living pebbles coming, little living rocks coming to the rock of our salvation. He has always wanted to dwell in us. Where Moses said in Exodus 25:8, I want it done so that I may dwell among them. Paul is saying, and he's been walking with the Lord, I want to be in them, not just with them. I want to be in them. And so as an individual child of God, God dwells in me. But we, the church, what's the church? Last Thursday night, we, the church, is where God has his eternal dwelling place. This is where the Lord's always wanted to be, with his people and in his people. Write it in their sight that they may observe its whole design and its statutes and do them. No construction, do it. Well, I've read that before and I didn't get anything out of it. I don't understand it. Pray, pray, pray. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here. That's pretty much the message for this morning, but this is just one of three pieces. We know what the church, and I guess you knew where I was going. We know what the church scattered is supposed to do. We're supposed to go and preach the gospel. Go and preach the gospel to every creature. Make disciples, baptize them, teach them. We're to be lights out there in the world. We're to be ambassadors for Christ. We're to live holy lives, talk holy, act holy. The church scattered. We're the representatives of the Lord wherever, whenever we are there. But is there a pattern or a plan for the gathered church? That's the scattered church. But the gathered church is when believers, the sheep of God, the body of Christ, meet in local congregations, mostly on Sundays. Some hold to a Sabbatarian doctrine. We should be meeting on Saturdays, and they do. Paul said just so it's once a week. But the pattern, as we'll see this evening, is they met upon the first day of the week. The disciples, the apostles. But how much of a pattern is there for the church? He didn't leave anything up to Noah. He didn't leave anything up to Moses. He didn't leave anything up to the whims of Solomon. He didn't leave anything up to Ezekiel, what to say and what not to say. But it comes to the church and we can just do whatever we want to do and have our meetings however we want to have our meetings. Okay, that's the message for tonight. And I hope and pray that that you'll be here 6:30 this evening by God's grace, California time. Okay.